Your Steve Jones Show podcast will start shortly. The Steve Jones Show podcast is sponsored by Brewers Outlet, your beverage supermarket on Reagan Street in Sunbury.
Great to have with us the outstanding Mark Brennan. Sir, welcome back. Great to have you with us.
It's great to be here, Steve. I have a quick Ricky Ricardo story for you. I was driving home from Columbus and trying to listen to an Eagles game, and I couldn't get the English feed. So I turned into Spanish feed, and you know what? I don't really speak Spanish, other than ordering a beer.
Right.
But you could understand what was going on because some of the words are the same. And Miles Sanders touchdown, and it was actually pretty cool and a learning experience. And you got an appreciation for the enthusiasm of that man. It was tremendous. So that was a pretty cool story.
He is, he is an outstanding announcer. And when you're doing this particular show, you sit back, he is a great guest to have on. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
He saved John Sterling's life. You hear about that story?
I didn't.
Yeah, John, remember the flooding that took place? They had that heavy, heavy rains. And the flooding hit New York City and New Jersey late in the season. And Ricky's at an intersection, and all of a sudden he looks over and he sees John's car, and John's car is starting to get overrun with water. Ricky went over and got him out of the car before it got washed away. It was phenomenal. We had him on to talk about that story. It was incredible.
That's cool.
All right, so let's get to yesterday's game. The result really was about what I think Dick and I thought it would be. I mean, Dick said in the pregame show straight out, he said, "Look, the only thing I can see as a scenario here is Penn State wins big." What did you think watching them this week, not just yesterday, but also the last 13-20 against Michigan State?
Yeah, I couldn't believe the closing line for that game was 5.5. I don't bet on stuff, but I should have called my friends who do because that seemed like crazy to me. But, the thing that I've liked about this team under Shrewsbury is that they acknowledge when they mess up and they learn from it. And that, to me, is what happened in the previous Minnesota game. 13 turnovers, more importantly, leading to 26 points for Minnesota. So you're giving Minnesota 26 points. And after a couple early turnovers yesterday, they just tightened that up, and Minnesota ended that game with 3 points off turnovers, one of them coming in the final minute of the game when a bunch of the backups were in. So Penn State didn't play a perfect game. Seth Lundy didn't have a great game. There were a couple of defensive lapses against one player, but they learned from their mistakes in that previous Minnesota game and how bad that game was for them. And I know, people can talk about officiating or whatever, but Penn State really shot itself in the foot in that game. To come back from that and then beat Michigan State and then do what they did against Minnesota, I think it definitely says something about the coaching of this team. I mean, they're learning from mistakes, and the players are buying into what Shrewsbury and everybody else is preaching.
Yeah, let's get to the Michigan State game for a moment. This, again, learning from what you've done. You notice what they did. They sent one to the basket, Hera, on a shot.
Right.
The other four dropped back right away. Now, Big John's still out there getting offensive rebounds. So that's not a bad fail-safe to have. But the strategy worked beautifully. The Michigan State could never play the way they wanted to play.
Well, and I think you're looking at a different Michigan State team now than we used to see because,
Mark, I've been saying that all year, right? This is not.
I mean, those big guys, those are not your typical Michigan State big guys.
Point guards.
Michigan State, yeah. And that, but to Penn State's credit, they knew that, and they took advantage of it, and that's why they were able to do that with John. And I give him 1,000 times credit for doing that against that team. It was just tremendous. But, I also like the fact that just what they're doing rebounding-wise defensively, they are focusing on getting defensive rebounds and not allowing second-chance points. And that was another key to that Michigan State game. They held them to 0 second-chance points in the first half. Michigan State, when they went on their spurt in the second half, had, I think, 10 in a very short period of time. Then Penn State tightened it up. But with the tempo that this team's playing, and let's face it, let's call it what it is. this is not the most talented team. So to be able to hang with teams that have more athletic ability and more overall talent, they're slowing the tempo. They're the slowest tempo team, as you know, in the Big Ten. Mm-hmm. And the stuff that we're talking about, what they did with Hara on the offensive glass, and then team rebounding on the defensive glass, that plays into it. And that's where, when I've been harping all year, when this team turns the ball over, it is magnified because you're limiting your possessions to start with. So you can't give those possessions away. And if you go back and look at every one of their tough losses, you will see key turnovers that cost them possessions. And you can't do that. If you're only getting X number of possessions per game, you can't eliminate whatever percent of those things and cost yourself chances to score because they're just not a super efficient team at scoring.
And that's why I made the point. The first question I asked Mike in the post-game show yesterday, I said, what did it mean to you that when you see that you scored on 51% of your possessions yesterday? They scored on 51% of their possessions.
Yeah, well, then the other thing they did, Steve, was just attack the paint. And it started with Jalen Pickett. I mean, he had a bucket to start the game. He scored twice in the paint. He is doing something. We've seen it from Tony Carr. You don't see it that much. We saw it from DJ Newbill. You don't see it that much at the college level anymore. I was watching the Sixers-Bucks last night, and Drew Holiday was doing it. He's very good. There's a lot of guards in the NBA that do it, but guards who can get a defender on their hip, back them down, and score. And think about it. How much do you see that anymore in the college game? But to have a guy like Pickett who can do that, and then when they start moving on him, he's savvy enough that he could fire the ball out, either get a direct assist or a hockey assist, and that's where that whole offense was moving. That was very fun to watch, and to watch them attack the paint like that, and for Minnesota to have no answers, I thought was again, another instance of coaches figuring out what's going to work and the players buying into it. And it's almost as if you see it like that light bulb, above the head going off for these guys kind of late in the season. All
right. So I want to get to the college football playoff because, of course, the announcement came out that they're going to stick with 4 through the end of the contract, which means the next TV round of contracts is going to come up about 2.5 years from now. So they're going to have to have something in place before then so people know what they're bidding on and how many bidders they want. So just to give everybody a time frame as to when it could happen, it's not going to be like, they're going to wait till it's over with. No.
Right.
What was your thought as to how this played out and why it played out the way it did?
I'm assuming it's I hate to be a skeptic, but I think it's working for certain conferences. It's not really working for other conferences, and that's where I would say, Steve, that the thing that James Franklin has been kind of not so subtly hinting at the last couple of years about the Big Ten and adjusting, doing something to figure out a way where you don't have this disparity of talent in the East versus the West. Because I think the East teams are just gobbling each other up, and it's making it very difficult for the Big Ten to get as many teams into that college football playoff when it's at 4. But it's not only the Big Ten that's worrying about it. So if you're in the SEC, you're perfectly content with the way that this thing is working. So that's, maybe I'm a skeptic, but I think it's working for certain conferences. It's obviously making money. That goes into it. But I do think if this thing were opened up to 8, the Big Ten would be a much bigger factor. And until the Big Ten comes up with some sort of restructuring of the conference divisions or whatever, I think it's going to be very difficult for them to make the sort of impact the SEC is making, just because, again, you look at the teams in the East and what they do to each other every year, it's really just, very difficult to get out of there.
Yeah, that's why I've advocated for 12. I've advocated for 12 for over a year, even before the original proposal came out. But with but you have to also make concessions if you want to do that. And one of the concessions I think instead of having 1 bye week, I think every conference needs to have 2 bye weeks, because anybody who makes the playoff, you're trying to couch the amount of hitting, because you'll have a 3rd bye week because there's going to be a separator between conference championship games and when the playoff begins.
Yeah, and I would be all for that. I mean, I think that's a good idea. And, just as physical, as many injuries as you're seeing, I think having an extra bye week would be a good thing, too. And if you can do that as a means to getting a playoff, I'm all for it.
Yeah. In the end, just as your guess, what do you think would be the best format for them to do?
My thought would be to go 8 because I think there's less likelihood of missing out on one of the best teams. I would not be averse to 12, but I think 8 would be mathematically the easiest thing for them to figure out. So that would be my kind of take on it.
Okay. And the other announcement made today was that the men's and women's Final Fours will remain separate. In separate cities. There have been some thought they might take the women's Final Four and couple it with the men's. What was your thought on that?
I did not hear that, but
that's why this show exists.
Yeah, I think it would actually be my take, and I don't follow women's basketball very closely, but I think if you were to have them both in the same facility, it would actually be good for the women's game, because I think you would get more eyes on it. I mean, I think, or not in the same, at the same time, in the same area, whatever. I always thought it would be cool if, and I was just kind of thinking about this a couple weeks ago, like the Big Ten. And I know they'll never do it because they want to separate everything out, but how cool would it be for the Big Ten to have like a championship winter sports week where you had men's hoops, women's hoops, and wrestling all in the same city in the same week? Again, I know that's never going to happen, but I think from a fan's perspective, that would be awesome that you can go to an Indianapolis. They have enough facilities there and have different things going on in different places, and I think it would be a whole lot of fun. But I know why they don't do that, because by spreading them out one week to another week to another week, you're spreading out the overall coverage that much more. You're not condensing it into one thing. But I think from a fan perspective, it would be great. And that's kind of what I'm getting at with the men's and women's hoops being at the same place for the Final Four. I think it would just get more eyes on the women's game, which I think would be very helpful for it.
Outstanding as always. Enjoy it. Thanks so much, Mark. Have a great weekend. And I know I've said this before, but congrats to Grace on the great work she's doing, too.
I appreciate it, Steve, and thanks for having me on, and I will see you next week. What is the next home game? It's not Monday. It's
Friday night. Friday. Oh, it's the James Harden debut game for the Sixers, and I'm going to be at the Jordan Center. But we'll have fun. Yep. Sounds great. I look forward to it. It's a big game because that might be the game that determines who plays Wednesday and who plays Thursday. So.
Yeah, it's looking that way. Hey, big game coming up Monday, too, though. That's
absolutely.
A big game for Penn State, potentially getting to 500. So.
Huge.
All right, Steve.
That's huge. Thanks, Mark.
Yep. Thanks, buddy.